On my 28th birthday, my father tossed a battered shoebox onto my table, claiming it was all Grandma left for the family's biggest disappointment. He sneered, adjusted his expensive silk tie, and walked out of my shabby apartment, convinced he had buried the truth forever. But he made a fatal mistake. He forgot that I am an antique restoration expert, and I see the secrets hidden beneath the dust that ordinary people never notice. My name is Nancy Willoughby. I am 28 years old, and if you saw me walking down the rain-slicked streets of Seattle, you would not look twice. I blend into the gray background of this city like a smudge of graphite on an old sketch. I work at a place called Archive and Preserve Company, a small, dusty firm tucked away in a basement office that smells perpetually of vinegar and decaying paper. My job title is technically restoration technician, but to the rest of the world, I am just a girl who cleans up other people's trash. I spend my days hunched over magnifying glasses, using tweezers to lift fibers from documents that are falling apart, or mixing chemical solutions to remove rust stains from Victorian-era latches. It is quiet work. It is invisible work, and that suits me just fine. I have spent my entire life trying to make myself smaller, trying to occupy the least amount of space possible so that the towering egos of my family would not trip over me. My apartment reflects this desire for invisibility. It is a studio unit in a building that was likely condemned 10 years ago but somehow slipped through the cracks of the city inspectors. The rent is $1,200 a month, which takes up nearly 60% of my paycheck. The walls are thin, vibrating with the bass of the neighbor's stereo, and the ceiling in the bathroom has a water stain that looks remarkably like a weeping face. It is damp, it is cramped, and it is the only place in the world that is mine. It was a Tuesday evening, just past 6 o'clock, when the illusion of my safe little world was shattered. The rain was hammering against the single window pane, a relentless rhythm that usually soothed me. I was sitting on my second-hand sofa, eating instant noodles and trying to ignore the draft coming from under the door. Then, there was a knock. It was not the tentative tap of a neighbor borrowing sugar, nor the aggressive pounding of the landlord looking for rent. It was a firm, authoritative rap. 3 distinct strikes, hard, precise, demanding. I opened the door and felt the air leave my lungs. Standing in my dim hallway, illuminated by the flickering fluorescent bulb overhead, was Marcus Willoughby, my father. I had not seen him in 2 years. I had not spoken to him in nearly as long. Yet, looking at him, it felt as if no time had passed at all. He looked exactly the same, imposing, immaculate, and utterly out of place. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that likely cost more than I earned in 6 months. His silk tie was knotted with architectural precision, and his silver hair was swept back, not a single strand out of place. He looked like what he was, a titan of industry, the owner of Willoughby Designs, one of the most prestigious architectural firms on the West Coast. He looked at me, and his lip curled. It was a micro-expression, gone in a fraction of a second. But I caught it. I have been trained to spot the tiniest imperfections in a canvas, and I certainly know how to read the disdain in my father's face. "Nancy," he said. His voice was smooth, deep, and completely devoid of warmth. "Dad," I whispered, gripping the doorframe. My knuckles turned white. "What are you doing here?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he pushed past me, stepping into my apartment without waiting for an invitation. He moved with the confidence of a man who owns every room he walks into. He stood in the center of my living space, his polished Italian leather shoes gleaming against my warped linoleum floor. He scanned the room, his eyes lingering on the peeling paint, the stack of library books on the floor, and the half-eaten cup of noodles on the table. "It smells like mildew in here," he stated, turning to face me. "And poverty. It is what I can afford," I said, closing the door. My voice was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I work hard," Marcus laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. "Work? Is that what you call it? I heard you are working at some basement preservation shop, Archive and Preserve, Is it fixing broken teacups and taping together torn letters? He shook his head, a look of genuine pity mixed with disgust on his face. You are a Willoughby, Nancy. We build skyscrapers. We define skylines. And here you are, digging through trash looking for gold. It is embarrassing. I bit the inside of my cheek. I preserve history. Dad, it matters. History is written by the victors. Nancy, not the janitors, he snapped. He reached into the expensive leather briefcase he was carrying. The leather creaked softly, a sound of luxury that seemed alien in my apartment. He pulled out a shoebox. It was an ordinary cardboard shoebox, battered and worn at the corners. The lid was held on by a single rubber band that looked like it was about to snap. It was stained with age and looked like something you would find at the bottom of a donation bin. He held it out to me, not with care, but with a thrust, forcing me to take it before he dropped it. Your grandmother wanted this thrown out, Marcus said. His eyes bored into mine. She was quite clear about it in her final days. She said to burn it, but I suppose I have a soft spot for hopeless causes. I kept it, for you. I took the box. It was light. It felt fragile in my hands. Grandma Rose, I asked, my voice trembling. She left this for me. Left it for you. Marcus let out a sigh, adjusting his cufflinks. Nancy, do not be delusional. She did not leave it for you in the sense of an inheritance. She left it behind as trash. I am the one giving it to you. Consider it an act of charity. I stared at the box. I had missed the funeral 3 years ago. Not because I wanted to, but because I had been told the date wrong. By the time I arrived at the cemetery, the service was over, and the cars were pulling away. I had stood in the rain, alone, staring at the fresh dirt. I had always wondered why. Why had she not called me? Why had she not said goodbye? She asked about you, you know, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a register that sounded almost intimate, almost kind, but I knew better. It was the tone he used right before he demolished a competitor in a boardroom. In the hospital, during those last 48 hours, I looked up, hope flaring in my chest despite my better judgment. She did. Yes, Marcus said. He took a step closer to me, looming over me, sucking the air out of the room. She asked where she went wrong with you. She told me that her biggest regret was that the Willoughby name was attached to someone so utterly mediocre. The words hit me like physical blows. I felt my knees go weak. She didn't say that, I whispered. Grandma loved me. She loved the idea of a granddaughter, Marcus corrected. But the reality of you, the reality of a 25-year-old dropout working a minimum wage job, she was ashamed. Nancy, she told me, right before the end, that she would rather have had no grandchild at all than to have one who settled for a life of menial labor. Tears pricked my eyes. Hot and stinging, I blinked them back. I would not cry in front of him. I had learned that lesson when I was 7 years old. Crying only made him smile. She said you were the biggest disappointment of the bloodline, Marcus continued, his voice relentless. She died ashamed of you. That is her legacy to you. Nancy, shame. He gestured to the battered box in my hands. And that box, whatever garbage is in there, it is fitting. It is all you deserve. I stood there, frozen. The box felt heavy now, leaden with the weight of my grandmother's supposed hatred. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the box at him and tell him he was a liar. But the conditioning of 28 years is a powerful thing. I had spent my entire life being told I was not enough, that I was slow, that I was uninspired, that I was a shadow of the great Marcus Willoughby. When you hear a lie enough times, it starts to sound like the truth. So I did what I always did. I lowered my head. I accepted the verdict. Thank you for bringing it, I said, my voice hollow. Marcus sneered, satisfied with my submission. He checked his watch, a gold Patek Philippe that cost more than my entire college tuition had been. I cannot stay, he said, checking his reflection in my darkened window. I have a press conference in 2 hours. We are finally announcing the groundbreaking of the Rose Tower. My head snapped up. The Rose Tower. A 50-story masterpiece, Marcus said, puffing out his chest. Glass, steel, and pure vision. It will be the tallest building in the district. A tribute to my mother. It is the project that will cement my legacy as the greatest architect of this century. He buttoned his jacket. And of course, it is for Julian's future. Julian, my half-brother, 10 years younger than me, the son of Marcus and his second wife, Elena, the golden child. Julian is already showing signs of genius, Marcus said, a genuine warmth entering his voice that had never been there for me. He is only 18, but he has an eye for design that rivals my own. When I am gone, Julian will inherit everything, Willoughby Designs, the Rose Tower, the estate, everything. He looked at me, making sure I understood the implication. There will be nothing for you, Nancy, but then again, you have your box of trash. So perhaps things are balanced. He reached out and patted my cheek. His hand was cold and dry. It was a gesture of dominance, not affection. Clean this place up, he said, looking around one last time with a grimace. You live like a rodent. It turns my stomach. He turned and walked to the door. He opened it, and the sound of the rain grew louder, filling the silence of the room. He did not look back. He simply stepped out into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind him. I heard his footsteps retreating down the hall. Click, clack, click, clack, then the heavy thud of the main building door closing downstairs. I was alone. I stood in the center of my apartment for a long time, clutching the damp, old shoebox to my chest. The smell of his expensive cologne lingered in the air, overpowering the scent of my instant noodles. My heart felt like it had been carved out with a rusty spoon. He had come here after 2 years just to tell me that, just to make sure I knew that even in death. My grandmother had rejected me. He wanted to ensure that any spark of hope I had was extinguished before he built his great tower. I looked down at the box. The cardboard was soft with age. One corner was torn. It looked like garbage. It looked like me. I walked over to my small, wobbly kitchen table and set the box down. My hands were shaking. I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. I wanted to take the box and shove it into the trash can. I wanted to forget this night ever happened. I wanted to crawl into bed and sleep for 100 years. But then, I looked at the way the tape was peeling on the side of the box. I am a restoration expert. It is not just my job. It is who I am. I look at things that are broken, things that are discarded, and I ask them what they are hiding. I look for the story beneath the stain. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the old cardboard. Underneath the smell of dust, there was something else, faint, barely there, but unmistakable. Lavender. It was the scent of Grandma Rose's perfume. I pulled out my chair and sat down. The paralysis was fading, replaced by a dull, aching throb in my chest. Marcus had left me with humiliation. He had left me with nothing. But he was wrong about one thing. He thought he had left me with trash. I reached out and touched the lid of the box. He did not know who I was. He saw a failure. He saw a disappointed daughter. He did not know that he was looking at the best archivist in the state of Washington. He did not know that I could read the history of an object just by the way it had been handled. And as I looked at the box, really looked at it, I saw that the rubber band was not just old. It was a specific type of elastic band used to bind architectural blueprints in the 1990s. My father thought this was the end of the story. He thought he had closed the book on Nancy Willoughby. I slipped my finger under the rubber band. He had no idea that he had just handed me the first chapter. I cleared the kitchen table. The remnants of my instant noodles were discarded. The surface wiped down with a fervor that bordered on obsessive. I needed a clean field of operation. In my line of work, contamination is the enemy of truth. I went to my work bag, which sat in the corner by the door, and retrieved my field kit. I laid out the tools with the muscle memory of a surgeon preparing for a bypass, a lighted magnifying loupe. a set of fine-point tweezers, a bone folder, and a number 11 surgical scalpel. The scarf lay on the table under the harsh glare of my portable LED work lamp. To the naked eye, the hem was just a hem. It was a simple fold of wool, stitched with a thread that matched the deep burgundy of the fabric perfectly. But I was not looking with the naked eye. I adjusted the loop over my right eye and leaned in, my nose hovering inches from the fabric. Under 5 times magnification, the anomaly screamed at me. The original scarf had been machine knitted. The tension of the weave was mathematically perfect, a uniform grid of interlocking loops, but along the bottom 3 inches of the left side, the thread was different. It was the same color. Yes, but the fiber twist was slightly looser, and the stitching method was a hand-done blind stitch, not a machine lock. Whoever had resewn this had hands that shook slightly, creating microscopic irregularities in the spacing. Grandma rose. I picked up the scalpel. My hand, which had been trembling only moments before when facing my father, was now rock steady. This was my domain. I knew how to dismantle things without destroying them. I slipped the tip of the blade under the first loop of the hidden thread. With a gentle upward flick of my wrist, I severed it. Snip. I moved to the next loop. Snip. It took me 20 minutes to undo what likely took my grandmother an hour to sew. I worked in silence. The only sound, the rhythmic rasp of the blade against the wool and the heavy thud of the rain against the window, as the last stitch gave way. The hem fell open like a mouth finally allowed to speak. There was no velvet pouch, no dramatic wrapping. Tucked inside the fold of the wool were 2 items, flattened by time and pressure. The first was a folded sheet of paper. It was not standard printer paper, nor was it the heavy cardstock she favored for her correspondence. It was onion skin paper, translucent, incredibly thin, and durable. Architects used to use it for overlays and tracing back in the days before digital drafting took over. It crinkled with a distinct, metallic sound as I lifted it out with my tweezers. The second object slid out and clattered onto the table. I stared at it. I had expected an old iron key, perhaps something for a safe deposit box from the 1950s, or a small brass key for a jewelry chest. Marcus had called her old-fashioned, stuck in the past. But this was a high-security magnetic key fob. It was black, sleek, and heavy for its size. It had no teeth. Instead, it had a complex geometric chip embedded in the center and a serial number laser-etched onto the side. This was state-of-the-art security technology. This was the kind of key used for climate-controlled vaults that housed server farms or multi-million-dollar art collections. I set the key aside and picked up the letter. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that echoed in my ears. I unfolded the onion skin paper. It had been folded tight, the creases sharp enough to cut. The handwriting covered the page, cramped and spiked, the ink slightly erratic. It was her handwriting, but it lacked her usual flowing grace. It looked like it had been written in haste, or perhaps in secret. My dearest Nancy, it began. I felt a lump form in my throat, hard and painful. If you are reading this, then my plan worked. I knew you would be the one to look. You were always the only one who really looked at things. Marcus sees the surface, the shine, the facade. You see the structure. You see the cracks. I read on, my eyes devouring the words. Do not believe a word your father tells you about me. He will tell you I was senile. He will tell you I was ashamed of you. That is his favorite weapon, shame. He uses it to break people so he can build himself up on their rubble. The letter continued, the pen strokes digging deeper into the paper as if fueled by anger. I did not sign those transfer papers willingly. Nancy, they kept me sedated. The doctor said it was for the pain, but it made my mind fog over. Marcus brought the lawyers in when I could barely lift my head. He guided my hand. He stole the legacy I built, and he intends to give it to that boy, Julian, who treats architecture like a video game. I paused, my breath catching. The narrative Marcus had spun the caring son tending to his dying mother was unraveling thread by thread. Then came the paragraph that made the blood run cold in my veins. Your father is a good businessman, but a bad architect. He has never drawn anything with a soul. He is a mimic. Nancy, a parrot. He takes what exists and makes it louder, but he cannot create. Everything he claims to have designed in the last 30 years came from my desk. He took my work because a woman in her 70s does not sell skyscrapers to the board of directors. But he got greedy. He wants to erase me completely. I set the letter down. The room felt suddenly very small and very cold. For my entire life, Marcus Willoughby had been the titan, the genius, the unreachable standard of excellence. I had been the failure, but the truth was inverted. He was the fraud. I was the threat. He had not given me this box out of pity. He had given it to me because he was arrogant. He thought I was too stupid, too beaten down, and too useless to find the truth hidden in a hem. He thought I would just cry over the scarf and throw it in the closet. He had underestimated the very thing he mocked my attention to detail. I picked up the key fob again. The serial number seemed to vibrate under the light. At the bottom of the letter, there was a single line of instruction. Fortress Storage, Unit 402, Code. The day I taught you to draw a perfect circle, I closed my eyes. August 12th, 2004. I was 6 years old. We were sitting on the porch, and she held my hand, guiding the pencil. Don't look at the line, she had said. Look at the center. The line will follow. 081204. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, a harsh sound that broke the trance. The sadness that had weighed me down since Marcus walked through my door was gone. In its place was something entirely different. It was a sensation I had never fully embraced before. It was a cold, crystalline anger. It was the kind of anger that did not burn hot and fast like a fire. It was the kind of anger that froze like a glacier slow, unstoppable, and capable of crushing mountains. He had lied about her love for me. That was the unforgivable sin. He had tried to weaponize her memory to hurt me one last time. I walked to the window and looked out at the rain-soaked city. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably toasting to his brilliance, surrounded by sycophants, believing he had won. He thought he was the architect of this family's story, but he had forgotten that before you build, you have to survey the land, and he had failed to notice the landmine he was standing on. I turned back to the room and grabbed my laptop. I needed to verify this before I made my next move. I sat down and typed Fortress Storage Seattle into the search bar. The website that loaded was minimalist and intimidating. It was dark blue and silver, boasting military-grade security for private assets. This was not a place where people stored old furniture and holiday decorations. This was where people stored gold bullion, sensitive legal files, and evidence. I navigated to the client login portal. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. If Marcus had found this place, if he had somehow accessed it, the game was over. But the letter said he didn't know. The letter said this was her sanctuary. I typed in the unit number, 402. I typed in the passcode, 081204. I hit enter. The screen buffered for an agonizing 3 seconds. I held my breath. Access granted. A profile page loaded. It was sparse, no photos, just account details. Primary account holder Rose Willoughby. Status deceased. Beneficiary/authorized access Nancy Willoughby. I stared at the screen. There was no Marcus, no Julian, no Elena. Just me. My name. Sitting there in white text against a blue background, validated by a digital system that did not care about family politics or emotional manipulation. She had planned this. She had known that eventually. He would try to take everything, and she had built a failsafe. She had moved her true legacy into the dark, locked it behind steel and encryption, and given the only key to the granddaughter everyone ignored. I looked at the clock. It was nearly 2 a.m. I had work at 8. I grabbed my phone. I navigated to my email app and composed a new message to my supervisor. Mr. Henderson, I did not ask for permission. I did not offer a vague excuse about being sick. Subject emergency. Leave of absence. Mr. Henderson, I require an immediate leave of absence for personal family matters. Effective tomorrow morning, I expect to be away for at least 3 days. I will update you if this timeline changes. Regards, Nancy. I hit send. I did not care if I got fired. The job, the rent, the struggle to survive it all seemed trivial now. I had a new job. My job was no longer to preserve the past for strangers. My job was to dismantle the future my father had built on lies. I looked at the black key fob one last time before slipping it into my pocket. It felt warm, as if it still held a trace of her energy. "Okay, Grandma," I whispered to the empty room. "Let us see what you hid." I did not sleep that night. I spent the hours sitting in the dark, watching the rain stop and the sun begin to bleed gray light over the horizon. I formulated a plan. I was going to fortress storage. I was going to open that vault, and whatever was inside, I was going to use it to bring the great Marcus Willoughby down to the ground, brick by brick. He wanted a legacy. I would give him one he would never forget. The drive to the outskirts of Seattle was a blur of gray highway and windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the drizzle. Fortress Storage was not the kind of place you stumbled upon by accident. It was situated in an industrial park that seemed abandoned, surrounded by warehouses with rusted corrugated roofs and chain-link fences topped with razor wire. The facility itself looked less like a storage center and more like a bunker designed to survive a nuclear winter. It was a monolith of windowless concrete, painted a severe slate gray that seemed to absorb the weak morning light rather than reflect it. I pulled my beaten-up sedan up to the security gate. A camera buzzed and rotated, focusing its unblinking lens on my license plate. A speaker crackled to life, demanding my business. I stated my name and the unit number, my voice sounding thinner than I would have liked against the mechanical hum of the gate. There was a pause, a long, agonizing silence where I imagined Marcus stepping out of the guard booth, laughing at my foolishness, but the gate simply groaned and rolled back, granting me access to the belly of the beast. The interior was climate-controlled and sterile, smelling of ozone and polished concrete. I approached the front desk, where a security officer with the build of a linebacker and the expression of a stone wall waited. He did not smile. He did not ask about the weather. He simply slid a biometric scanner toward me. "Right hand," he said. "Palm flat." I hesitated. This was the moment of truth. If Marcus had intercepted the account, if he had flagged me as an intruder, the alarms would sound now. I placed my trembling hand on the cool glass surface. A red laser swept across my skin, mapping the lifelines and ridges of my palm. The computer beeped. A green light flashed. "Welcome, Ms. Willoughby," the guard said, his tone shifting imperceptibly from suspicious to indifferent. "Unit 402 is on the 4th level. Subsection B. You have full access." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Marcus didn't know. He truly didn't know. The arrogance of the man was his blind spot. He could not conceive of a world where his mother had secrets he couldn't bully out of her. The elevator ride to the 4th floor was silent. When the doors opened, I stepped into a corridor lined with heavy steel doors, each secured with a keypad and a magnetic lock. I walked until I found 402. It looked exactly like the others, an anonymous steel slab hiding a universe of secrets. I pressed the black key fob against the sensor. The mechanism disengaged with a heavy, satisfying clunk that echoed in the empty hallway. I pushed the door open and fumbled for the light switch on the wall. Banks of fluorescent lights flickered overhead, humming to life one by one, illuminating the space. I gasped. I had expected boxes. I had expected stacks of old furniture, perhaps some jewelry, or crates of tax records. What I found was a cathedral of creation. The unit was massive, easily 3 times the size of my apartment. It was set up not as a storage locker, but as a fully functional architectural studio. Drafting tables were arranged in the center, their surfaces angled and waiting. Along the walls were floor-to-ceiling flat files, the kind used to store large-format blueprints. In the corners stood easels covered in drop cloths, and shelves lined with hundreds of sketchbooks. but it was the smell that hit me hardest. It was the scent of graphite, fixative spray, aging paper, and that faint, lingering trace of lavender. This was not a graveyard of discarded things. It was a living, breathing workspace. I walked into the room, my footsteps soft on the concrete. I approached the nearest drafting table. There was a drawing pinned to it, covered by a sheet of translucent vellum. I lifted the vellum. It was a sketch of the Helix Bridge. My breath caught in my throat. The Helix Bridge was one of Seattle's modern icons, a pedestrian walkway that spiraled over the highway like a strand of DNA. It was the project that had won Marcus the National Design Award 6 years ago. He had given interviews for months about how the idea came to him in a dream. A sudden strike of divine inspiration. I looked at the date in the bottom corner of the sketch. It was signed in Grandma Rose's distinctive, spiked handwriting, Rose Willoughby, September 2015. That was 4 years before Marcus claimed to have dreamt it. I moved to the flat files, pulling open a drawer labeled Public Works. Inside, I found the original elevations for the City Library extension. I found the structural concepts for the Oceanic Museum. I found the initial charcoal renderings for the Vantage Point skyscraper. Every single building that had cemented Marcus Willoughby's reputation as a visionary genius was here. They were all here, and they were all signed by Rose. My hands shook as I turned the pages. It wasn't just that she had drawn them, it was the notes in the margins. Marcus needs to understand the light refraction here. One note read, another said, he wants to use concrete, but it must be glass. It must breathe. I will have to convince him it was his idea. The betrayal was so vast, so absolute, that it made me dizzy. Marcus hadn't just stolen credit, he had been puppeteered. He was a hollow man, a suit that walked and talked, while his mother, the woman he called senile and embarrassing, had been the engine driving his entire existence. She had let him take the glory, likely to protect the family name, or perhaps because she knew the industry would never accept a woman of her age as a revolutionary. But then, I found the centerpiece. In the back of the room, on a pedestal covered by a velvet cloth, stood a large architectural model. I pulled the cloth away, and dust motes danced in the light. It was the Rose Tower. But the label on the base did not say the Rose Tower. It was engraved on a brass plaque, the Sanctuary. I stared at the model. It was breathtaking. It was the building Marcus was about to break ground on. But it was different. Marcus's version, the one I had seen on the news, was colder, sharper, designed to maximize rental space and impose dominance on the skyline. This model was softer. It had hanging gardens integrated into the facade. The spire wasn't a needle. It was a blooming flower, designed to catch rainwater and filter it down through the building. The date on the plaque was 10 years ago. You didn't just design it, Grandma, I whispered, tracing the curve of the miniature roof. You felt it. Marcus had taken her sanctuary, stripped it of its humanity, removed the gardens to save money, sharpened the edges to look more masculine, and slapped his name on it. He was building a corpse of her vision. I turned away from the model, my eyes scanning the room for the why. Why hide this? Why not expose him while she was alive? That was when I saw the metal filing cabinet in the corner, distinct from the artistic storage. It was a heavy, fireproof legal safe. It wasn't locked. I pulled the heavy drawer open. Inside, there was a single thick accordion folder made of red leather. It was labeled The Truth, for Nancy. I carried the folder to the drafting table and opened it. The first document was a letter from a man named Arthur Pendleton. I recognized the name vaguely. He was an old family friend, a lawyer who had vanished from our lives around the time I went to college. Rose, the letter read, I have done as you asked. The papers are filed. We have buried them deep within the shell companies where Marcus will never look, because he is too lazy to audit his own books. He thinks he owns the firm, but he only owns the operating license. The intellectual property is safe. I flipped through the pages, my mind racing to keep up with the legalese. There were deeds, there were copyright registrations, there were patent filings for specific structural designs, and then the smoking gun. It was a document titled Deed of Assignment and Transfer of Intellectual Property. It was dated 5 years ago. I, Rose Willoughby, being of sound mind and body, hereby transfer the entirety of my intellectual property, including all past, present, and future architectural designs, sketches, models, and concepts, specifically including the design known as the Sanctuary, later renamed the Rose Tower, without my consent, to the sole ownership of the Rose Willoughby Trust. I turned the page to see the beneficiary of the trust. Sole beneficiary. Nancy Willoughby. I froze. I read it again, and a third time. I wasn't just looking at evidence of plagiarism. I was looking at a theft of property that belonged to me. Marcus didn't own the design for the tower. He didn't own the design for the bridge. He didn't own any of it. Technically, he had been building my buildings. There was a second document attached, a medical affidavit signed by Dr. Arthur Pendleton, no relation to the lawyer. I assumed, or perhaps a brother. It detailed Rose's mental state. Patient is fully cogent. Claims of dementia are unfounded and appear to be manufactured by family members seeking power of attorney. This was the shield. The transfer of ownership was the sword. Marcus had told the world his mother was mad. He had told the world I was a disappointment. All the while, he was a trespasser in a kingdom that she had quietly handed to me years ago. I looked around the room again. The drawings seemed to pulse with a new energy. They weren't just sad remnants of a brilliant woman anymore. They were ammunition. He called me a scavenger, I said aloud, my voice gaining strength in the quiet room. He said I'd dig through trash. I picked up the deed. The paper was crisp and heavy. Well, Dad, I said, a cold smile touching my lips for the first time in years. I just dug up the title to your empire. I spent the next 3 hours photographing everything. I documented the dates, the signatures, the specific design elements that Marcus had claimed as his own. I packed the legal file into my bag, treating it with more reverence than any holy scripture. I carefully covered the model of the sanctuary back up. It wasn't time for the world to see it yet. Not until I could present it on my terms. As I walked out of Unit 402, I felt physically different. The hunch in my shoulders, the one I had developed from years of trying to be invisible, was gone. I walked with the stride of a woman who owned things. Important things. I locked the door and heard the heavy bolt slide home. It was a sound of finality. The grieving, confused Nancy who had opened that shoebox yesterday was gone. She had been left behind in that room, dissolved into the dust of the past. The Nancy who walked back to the elevator was dangerous. She was armed with 30 years of proof and the legal authority to burn Willoughby designs to the ground. I stepped into the elevator and watched the numbers climb down. 4, 3, 2, 1. I had a phone call to make. I needed to find Arthur Pendleton. If he was still alive, he was the only other person who knew where the bodies were buried. And together, we were going to plan a funeral for my father's career. Finding Arthur Pendleton was not difficult, but it was disheartening. The man who had once been the sharpest legal mind in Seattle's property law sector was now living in a peeling Victorian house in a neighborhood that real estate agents politely described as up and coming. In reality, it was a place where lawns went uncut and cars were parked on the sidewalk. I parked my sedan behind a rusted truck and checked the address I had found in the yellow pages. This was it, the fortress of the disgraced. I walked up the porch steps. Avoiding a rotting plank that looked ready to snap, I pressed the doorbell. But it made no sound. I knocked. The sound was swallowed by the heavy wood. I knocked again. Harder this time. "Go away," a voice croaked from behind the door. "I do not buy cookies, and I have found Jesus. Thank you very much." "Mr. Pendleton," I called out. "My name is Nancy Willoughby." There was a silence on the other side of the door. It was a heavy, loaded silence. Then came the sound of chains sliding and deadbolts turning. The door cracked open a few inches, held by a security chain. An eye peered out at me, bloodshot and framed by wrinkles deep enough to plant seeds in. "Willoughby?" He spat the name like it was a curse word. I should have known. You have your father's chin. What does Marcus want now? Did he run out of people to ruin? So he sent you to pick the bones. Marcus does not know I am here, I said quickly. And Marcus did not send me. Grandma Rose did. Arthur snorted. Rose is dead. God rest her soul. And Marcus made sure I was not allowed within 500 feet of the funeral. Go home, girl. He started to close the door. I found the unit at Fortress Storage, I said. My voice was quiet, but it stopped him cold. The door froze. The eye widened. I have the key, I continued, pressing my advantage. And I have the letter. She told me about the trust. Arthur, she told me you protected the drawings. The chain rattled. The door slammed shut for a brief second, only to open fully. Arthur Pendleton stood there, wearing a moth-eaten cardigan over a stained t-shirt, looking every bit the senile old lawyer my father had painted him as. But his eyes were sharp. They were dangerously sharp. Come in, he said, stepping aside. Quickly, before the neighbors start thinking I have company. His house was a maze of paper. Stacks of legal files lined the hallway, creating narrow canyons that we had to navigate single file. It smelled of old coffee and stale tobacco, the scent of a man who had stopped caring about the world outside his window. He led me into a living room that had been converted into a makeshift office. A computer from the early 2000s sat on a desk buried under mountains of documents. Arthur cleared a stack of magazines off a chair and gestured for me to sit. He remained standing, leaning against the mantel of a cold fireplace. Let me see it, he demanded. I opened my bag and pulled out the red accordion folder I had taken from the safe. I handed him the onion skin letter first. Arthur took it. His hands, which looked arthritic and stiff, handled the paper with a tenderness that broke my heart. He read it in silence. As his eyes scanned the page, I saw his jaw tighten. He blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. She wrote this, he whispered. She actually wrote it. I told her not to. I told her it was too risky. If Marcus had found this. He didn't, I said. He thought he had won. He gave me the box with the clue inside because he thought I was too stupid to figure it out. Arthur looked up at me, and a dry, humorless chuckle escaped his lips. That is Marcus's fatal flaw. He thinks everyone is as hollow as he is. He never understood Rose, and clearly, he does not understand you. He handed the letter back and picked up the legal documents. He flipped to the deed of transfer. You know what he did to me? Arthur asked, not looking up from the papers. When I tried to stop him from seizing her assets, he went to the Bar Association. He claimed I was mishandling funds. He claimed I was taking advantage of an elderly client with dementia. He paid off 2 witnesses to say I was confused during meetings. He stripped me of my license. Nancy, 40 years of practice, gone in a month. He told me you retired, I said softly. I was exiled, Arthur corrected. He destroyed my reputation so that if I ever tried to speak up about the theft, no one would believe me. Who listens to a disbarred, senile lawyer over the great Marcus Willoughby? He slammed the folder shut. But he missed this. He was so focused on the real estate, on the money, on the physical assets. He never cared about the art. To him, the drawings were just a means to an end. He didn't think they had value on their own. So it is true, I asked. The trust, the intellectual property. Arthur nodded. It is ironclad. We set it up 5 years ago, on a day when your father was in Tokyo accepting an award for a building he did not design. Rose and I filed the paperwork under a holding company name. The Lavender Group, which lists you as the sole beneficiary. The specific clause we used relies on the separation of copyright and physical ownership. Marcus owns the land the Rose Tower sits on. He owns the steel and the glass, but the design, the look, the very soul of the building that belongs to you. I felt a surge of adrenaline. So we sue him. We take this to court tomorrow. We get an injunction and stop the construction. Arthur looked at me with pity. He walked over to the window and peered out through the blinds. Nancy, listen to me. You are thinking like a righteous person. You need to think like a predator. If we file a lawsuit tomorrow, do you know what happens? Marcus will unleash an army of corporate lawyers. They will file motions to dismiss. They will claim Rose was incompetent when she signed the trust. They will drag this out for 5 years, maybe 10. He has millions of dollars to burn on legal fees. Do you have $10 million? I sank back into the chair. No, I have $200 in my checking account. Exactly, Arthur said. Turning back to me, he will bury you in paperwork. He will bankrupt you before you ever step foot in a courtroom. And in the meantime, he will build his tower, take his credit, and the world will move on. By the time you win, if you win, no one will care. So what do? I asked, frustration rising in my voice. Do we just let him get away with it? Arthur smiled. It was a slow, predatory smile that made him look 20 years younger. No, we do not sue him. Not yet. We execute him. He walked over to the desk and pulled out a fresh legal pad. Marcus thrives on one thing: perception. He is a narcissist. His power does not come from his money. It comes from his reputation as a genius. If you attack his wallet, he will fight. If you attack his ego, he will crumble. I thought about the gala. I thought about the way he had looked at me in my apartment, dismissing me as a speck of dirt. The Rose Tower Gala, I said. It is happening on Saturday night. It is going to be televised. The mayor will be there. The Architecture Digest critics. Everyone. Arthur nodded. Saturday. That gives us 3 days. 3 days to do what? To prepare the evidence, Arthur said. We cannot just walk in there and shout. We need proof that is undeniable. We need to digitize every single original drawing in that storage unit. We need to overlay them with Marcus's blueprints. We need to create a visual presentation that a child could understand. We need to show the world, side by side, the theft. I can do that, I said, my mind already racing. I have a friend from college, Leo. He works in audio-visual tech. He owes me a favor. If I can get the files to him, he can prep them for a broadcast. Good, Arthur said. He picked up a pen. I will handle the legal side. I will draft a cease and desist order, but I will not file it with the court yet. I will have it notarized and ready to serve personally. When you drop the bomb, I want to be there to hand him the shrapnel. You want to come? I asked, surprised. I thought you were in exile. Arthur straightened his spine. I have been hiding in this house for 3 years, letting that man think he broke me. I think it is time the senile old lawyer made one last appearance. We spent the next 4 hours mapping out the plan. It was a war room session. We categorized the drawings by date. We identified the specific design elements of the Rose Tower, the spiral spire, the garden integration, the load-bearing arches that were unique to Grandma Rose's style. We built a timeline of Marcus's lies. Arthur was brilliant. He remembered details from contracts signed a decade ago. He pointed out clauses in the partnership agreement between Marcus and Rose that explicitly forbade the unauthorized use of her sketches. Every time he found a new loophole Marcus had exploited, his anger grew, fueling his energy. By the time the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the piles of paper. We had a strategy. It wasn't a legal defense. It was an ambush. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text message. Sender Julian. I stared at the name. My half-brother, the boy who had never worked a day in his life but drove a Porsche. I opened the message. Hey, Nance. Just saw the final guest list for the big night. Dad said not to bother sending you an invite since you wouldn't have anything to wear anyway. LOL. Just wanted to let you know it's going to be epic. Maybe you can watch it on the news. Mom says hi. Attached to the text was a selfie. Julian was standing in front of the construction site of the Rose Tower, wearing a hard hat that looked pristine, giving a thumbs up. Behind him, the steel skeleton of the building rose into the sky. My building. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. Not shame, not anymore. It was pure, unadulterated fury. Bad news, Arthur asked, watching me. I held up the phone for him to see. My brother, rubbing it in, Arthur read the text and scoffed. He is just like his father, cruel without purpose. He thinks I am going to be watching on the news, I said, typing a reply but not sending it. I deleted the draft. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a response. He is right, Arthur said. You will not be watching the news. You will be making it. I stood up and gathered the files. I need to get these to Leo. We have a lot of scanning to do. I will need access to a high-resolution, wide-format scanner. My office has one. Wait, Arthur said. You are going back to work. I am on leave, I said. But I still have my keycard. And no one is there at 3 a.m. I am going to use the very skills my father mocked to destroy him. He called me a scanner of trash fine. I will scan the truth. Arthur walked me to the door. The defeat I had seen in his eyes earlier was gone. He looked like a man with a purpose. Nancy, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. Your grandmother would be proud, not because you are fighting, but because you are smart enough to win. I am not doing this for pride. Arthur, I said, stepping out into the cool evening air. I am doing this for restitution. I walked to my car, the weight of the red folder under my arm feeling like a shield. Julian's text message burned in my mind. You wouldn't have anything to wear anyway. He was right about that. My wardrobe consisted of thrift store finds and sensible work clothes. If I was going to crash the event of the season, if I was going to walk into the lion's den and tear it apart, I couldn't look like Nancy the archivist. I couldn't look like the poor relation. I needed armor. I started the engine. I had a credit card with a $5,000 limit that I had been saving for an emergency. This was an emergency. I was going to spend every cent of it. I pulled out of the driveway, leaving Arthur to prepare his legal daggers. The alliance was formed. The past was no longer a ghost haunting me. It was an army at my back, and Marcus Willoughby, sitting high in his tower of glass, had no idea that the foundation was about to crumble. The sale of my car was the first irrevocable step. It was a rusted Honda Civic that rattled when it went over 40 miles per hour. But it was mine. It represented my independence, my ability to leave, to escape. Handing the keys over to a mechanic named Sal for $2,000 in cash felt like cutting off a limb. But I did not need an escape vehicle anymore. I needed war paint. I took the cash, along with the meager savings I had scraped together from skipping lunches, and walked into a high-end boutique in downtown Seattle. The sales assistant looked at my worn sneakers and rain jacket with a familiar sneer. The kind I had seen on my stepmother's face 1,000 times. I did not shrink away. I walked straight to the rack holding the evening wear. I found it, a floor-length gown in a deep, midnight blue velvet. It was structured, with a sharp, asymmetrical neckline that mimicked the lines of the very architecture my family prized. It was severe, elegant, and commanded attention. It cost $3,500. I paid in cash, watching the sales assistant's expression shift from disdain to confused respect. I was not buying a dress. I was buying a costume for a character I needed to play the heiress returning to claim her throne. For the next 24 hours, Arthur Pendleton's dining room became a production studio. The air was thick with the smell of scanning toner and stale coffee. We had hundreds of documents, but we needed a narrative. A lawsuit is boring. A story is lethal. People do not read affidavits. Nancy, Arthur said, his voice raspy from lack of sleep. They watch pictures. We need to make this so simple that a 5-year-old could see the theft. I worked on my laptop. While Arthur organized the physical timeline, I used video editing software to create a seamless overlay. I took a high-resolution scan of Grandma Rose's sketch for the Helix Bridge dated 2015 and lowered its opacity. Then, I layered the official architectural rendering Marcus had released in 2019 on top of it. The lines matched perfectly. It was chilling to watch. The curve of the steel, the placement of the support cables, the specific angle of the pedestrian walkway, it was not just similar, it was a trace. I did this for 10 different buildings, the library, the museum, the opera house, and finally, The sanctuary. I placed Grandma's lush, garden-filled design next to Marcus's cold, glass rose tower. I animated the transition, showing how he had stripped away the greenery, the warmth, and the soul, leaving only a hollow skeleton. It was a visual indictment of his entire career. "It is ready," I said, my eyes burning from the screen's glare. "It is a 5-minute loop. Once it starts, it is undeniable." Arthur nodded, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Now comes the hard part, getting it into the room." The launch event was being held in the grand atrium of the unfinished Rose Tower. Security would be tight. The mayor was attending, along with the city council and every major investor on the West Coast. Invitations were digital, encrypted, and non-transferable, but I knew something about large-scale construction sites that the security teams often forgot the chaos of the final hours. I dug through my closet and found it a plastic ID badge from 5 years ago. It read, "Nancy Willoughby, unpaid intern." I had spent a summer filing papers at Willoughby Designs, a pathetic attempt to get my father to notice me. He had ignored me the entire time, and the staff had treated me like part of the furniture. I was invisible then. I counted on being invisible now. I put on a pair of coveralls and a hard hat I had bought at a hardware store. I hung the badge around my neck. It was expired. The photo was faded, but it had the company logo. I walked up to the service entrance of the tower at 2 p.m. Caterers were unloading crates of champagne. Sound technicians were hauling speakers. The security guard at the gate was overwhelmed, shouting into a radio. I walked past him with a clipboard in my hand, looking annoyed. "Badge," he barked, half turning. I flashed the plastic card, not stopping, keeping my pace brisk. "Lighting check for the podium. I am running late because the freight elevator is jammed." He glanced at the logo, saw the name Willoughby, and waved me through. He didn't read the word intern. He didn't check the date. He just saw a woman in work clothes acting like she belonged there. I was inside. The atrium was a cavern of glass and polished stone. It was cold, smelling of sawdust and expensive lilies. A massive LED screen had been erected behind the main stage, the screen that would display Marcus's triumph. I scanned the room, looking for the AV booth. It was set up on a scaffolding platform in the back, shrouded in black curtains. I climbed the metal stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. A man was hunched over a mixing board, adjusting levels. He had headphones around his neck and a stress-induced sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Leo," I whispered. He jumped, spinning around. "Jesus, you are not supposed to be up here. This is a restricted—" He stopped. He squinted at me. "Nancy." Leo was one of the few people from college who knew the truth. We had taken a studio class together. He had seen my sketches. He had seen me crying in the library when Marcus publicly criticized my portfolio. He was a good technician, but he was a better friend. "I need a favor," I said, cutting straight to the chase. "A favor, Nancy. Look at this place. Your dad has Secret Service level security on the perimeter. If I get caught talking to you—" "He is a fraud. Leo," I said, stepping closer. "Everything. The bridge, the museum, this tower. He didn't draw any of it. Grandma Rose did." Leo stared at me. "That is a hell of an accusation." I pulled a flash drive from my pocket. "The proof is on here. Side-by-side comparisons. Dates. Signatures. It is all here." Leo looked at the drive, then back at the massive screen where a Willoughby Designs logo was slowly rotating. "What do you want me to do?" "When he starts his speech," I said, my voice steady. "When he starts talking about his genius, I want you to cut his feed and play this." "I will lose my job," Leo said. "I will be blacklisted." "You are a freelancer," I countered. "And after tonight, Willoughby Designs won't be hiring anyone because they won't exist. Be on the right side of history. Leo, please." He looked at the drive. He looked at the stage where Marcus would soon stand. He took a deep breath and snatched the drive from my hand. "If this is a prank, I will kill you," he muttered, plugging it into a secondary port on his console. Wait for my signal. I can't just override the system instantly. I have to cue it. I will be in the crowd, I said. Thank you. I slipped out of the venue the same way I came in, unnoticed and unremarked upon. I drove back to my apartment, my last trip in the rental car I had secured for the day. I had 3 hours until the gala began. I showered. Scrubbing the smell of the construction site from my skin, I did my hair, pulling it back into a severe, sleek bun. I applied makeup, emphasizing my eyes, making them sharp, turning my face into a mask of composure. I turned on the television while I dressed. The local news was already broadcasting live from outside the Rose Tower. The reporter was standing in the rain, gesturing to the illuminated spire. "A historic night for Seattle," she chirped. "Marcus Willoughby is set to unveil his masterpiece." The camera cut to a pre-recorded interview with Marcus. He was sitting in his office, looking distinguished and humble in that fake, practiced way of his. "My mother, Rose, was a sweet woman," Marcus said to the interviewer, his eyes misty. "She dabbled in painting, but architecture, no. That was always my burden, my gift. I think, in a way, this tower is me finishing the sentences she could never quite start." I felt a flash of heat in my chest, but I pushed it down. Then, the camera cut to Elena. She was wearing diamonds that probably cost more than Arthur Pendleton's house. "It was so hard on Marcus," Elena said, dabbing at dry eyes. "Towards the end, Rose didn't even know where she was. She would scribble nonsense on napkins and think they were blueprints. Marcus was a saint. He protected her dignity. He never let the world see how far she had fallen." I stopped zipping my dress. My hand flew to the pocket of my coat, where I had transferred the letter. I could feel the crinkle of the onion skin paper through the fabric. "He will tell you I was senile." She had written, "He uses shame to break people." She had predicted every word. She had seen this moment coming from beyond the grave. "Liar," I whispered at the screen, but I did not scream. I did not throw the remote. The anger that had been a raging fire for the last 2 days suddenly condensed. It cooled. It hardened. It became something solid and heavy in the pit of my stomach. They were not just thieves. They were erasers. They were trying to wipe a brilliant woman out of existence to feed their own vanity. I finished zipping the midnight blue dress. I stepped into high heels that added 3 inches to my height. I looked in the mirror. The girl in the rain jacket was gone. The girl who apologized for taking up space was gone. The woman in the mirror looked like a Willoughby. Not the fake kind, like Marcus or Julian. The real kind. The kind that built things to last. My phone rang. It was Arthur. "I am parked 2 blocks away," Arthur said. His voice was calm, professional. "I have the notary with me. I have the files. And I have the police on standby for the fraud charges, though they won't move until we show them the evidence." "I am ready," I said. "Nancy," Arthur paused. "Once you walk through those doors, there is no going back. You are burning the family tree." I looked at the image of Marcus on the television, smiling his shark-like smile. "It is already dead wood." "Arthur," I said. "I am just lighting the match." I hung up. I grabbed my clutch, checked that the magnetic key to the storage unit was safe inside, and walked out the door. The rain had stopped. The night was clear. It was a perfect night for a demolition. The grand atrium of the Rose Tower was not just a room. It was a cathedral dedicated to the worship of wealth. The ceiling soared 50 feet above us, a canopy of glass and steel that allowed the city lights to bleed in, mixing with the golden glow of the chandeliers. The air was frigid, conditioned to a precise temperature that kept the expensive makeup of the guests from melting, and it smelled of ozone, lilies, and expensive champagne. I stepped out of the elevator and onto the mezzanine level. The noise hit me first. It was a roar of polite conversation, a cacophony of clinking crystal and performative laughter. Below me, a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns swirled around the center of the room, where a string quartet played a sanitized version of Vivaldi. It was beautiful. It was breathtaking, and every inch of it was a lie. I paused at the top of the staircase. my hand resting on the brushed steel railing. I knew this railing. I had seen the specifications for it in Grandma Rose's sketchbook 3 days ago. She had wanted brass, warm and inviting, to catch the light. Marcus had switched it to steel. It was colder, cheaper, and more modern. It was the only part of the room that felt like him, the rest the sweeping arches, the integration of the indoor waterfalls, the way the light filtered through the geometric panels, was pure Rose Willoughby. I took a breath. My midnight blue velvet dress felt heavy against my skin, a suit of armor disguised as couture. I had spent hours in front of the mirror, erasing Nancy the archivist. I had contoured my cheekbones, darkened my lips to a deep crimson, and pulled my hair back so tight it pulled at my temples. I did not look like the girl who lived in a damp apartment. I looked like money. I looked like a shark. I began to descend the stairs. Heads turned. It is a primal instinct in high society to assess new arrivals, to calculate their net worth and social standing within seconds. I felt their eyes on me. I saw the whispers start behind manicured hands. Who is she? Is she an actress? Is she an investor? No one recognized me. That was the most biting insult of all. And yet, it was my greatest advantage. To these people, to my father's friends and colleagues. Nancy Willoughby did not exist. I was a footnote they had skipped over. I walked through the crowd. A phantom in plain sight. A waiter offered me a glass of champagne. I took it, not to drink, but to have a prop. I moved through the room, listening. Marcus has outdone himself, a man with a handlebar mustache said to his companion. The vision is extraordinary. I heard he designed the spire on a napkin during a flight to Paris, the woman replied, breathless with admiration. True genius just strikes, doesn't it? I gripped the stem of my glass so hard I thought it might snap. They were eating up the mythology he had spoon-fed them. I scanned the room for my targets. I saw Leo first. He was up on the lighting gantry, a dark silhouette against the bright lights. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. The weapon was loaded. Then I saw Julian. My half-brother was standing near the ice sculpture, a ridiculous carving of the tower itself. He was wearing a white tuxedo jacket that made him look like a valet parker, and he was holding court with a group of young socialites who looked bored. He was laughing too loudly, gesturing with a glass of scotch that I knew he didn't actually like. I approached him from behind. It is a bold choice, I said, my voice smooth and low. Wearing white after Labor Day. But I suppose when you are the heir, the rules do not apply. Julian spun around, a practiced smile plastered on his face. Well, you know what they say. Fashion is about breaking. The smile froze. He blinked. He squinted. The recognition hit him like a physical slap. His eyes widened, and his mouth fell open in a way that was entirely undignified. Nancy, he squeaked. His voice cracked, betraying the teenager beneath the tuxedo. What the hell? Hello, Julian, I said, taking a sip of my champagne. You look expensive. How did you get in here? He looked around frantically, as if expecting security to rappel down from the ceiling. This is a private event. The list is closed. Dad said you weren't coming. Dad says a lot of things, I replied. Most of them are fiction. Julian's shock was quickly replaced by the arrogance he had inherited from his father. He straightened his jacket and took a step toward me. Trying to use his height to intimidate me, it didn't work. I had been dealing with bullies my whole life. He was just an amateur. You need to leave, he hissed. Right now. Look at you. You think because you rented a dress you fit in, you are embarrassing yourself. If Dad sees you, he will have you thrown out into the street. He reached for his phone. I am calling security. I didn't flinch. I didn't grab his hand. I just leaned in close, invading his personal space, and whispered in his ear, Go ahead, Julian. Call them. And while we wait for them to arrive, I will borrow that microphone over there. I will tell your friends and the reporter from the Seattle Times standing right behind you about your transcripts from last semester. Julian froze. His thumb hovered over the screen. I will tell them how you failed basic design, not once, not twice, But 3 times, I continued, my voice sickly sweet. I will tell them how Dad had to donate a new wing to the art department just to keep you from being expelled for plagiarism. Do you think the heir to the throne narrative will survive that? The genius architect who cannot even draw a cube in perspective? Julian's face went pale. The color drained from his cheek so fast he matched his jacket. He looked at his friends, who were watching us with mild curiosity, and then back at me. The fear in his eyes was genuine. He knew I knew. You wouldn't, he whispered. Try me, I said, my eyes hard. I have nothing to lose. Julian, you have everything. He lowered his phone. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Smart boy, I said, patting his cheek, a mirror of the gesture Marcus had used on me 2 days ago. Now, go drink your scotch, and try not to look like you are about to vomit. It ruins the aesthetic. I turned my back on him, leaving him trembling by the ice sculpture. 1 down. I resumed my patrol. The room was filling up. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling that the speeches were about to begin. The spotlight swept across the room and landed on the stage, where a podium stood waiting. And then, the man of the hour appeared. Marcus Willoughby emerged from the VIP green room to my right. He was beaming. He was radiant with triumph. He shook hands. He kissed cheeks. He clapped men on the back. He looked like a king walking through his court. He was moving toward the stage, but his path took him past the pillar where I was standing. I stepped out of the shadows. Hello, Dad? Marcus stopped mid-step. He looked at me, and for a second, he didn't know who I was. He saw a woman in a velvet gown and assumed I was a donor or a client. He started to smile, his professional mask slipping into place. Then he saw my eyes. The smile died. It didn't fade. It was extinguished instantly. His face went rigid. His eyes darted left and right, checking to see if anyone was watching. He stepped in close, grabbing my upper arm. His grip was painful, his fingers digging into my muscle through the velvet. What do you think you are doing? He hissed through clenched teeth. His voice was a venomous whisper, completely at odds with the benevolent expression he kept on his face for the benefit of the room. I am enjoying the party, I said, keeping my voice level. I didn't pull away. I let him squeeze. I wanted to remember this feeling. It is a nice building, although the acoustics in the lobby are a bit sharp. Grandma always said you had a tin ear for echo. Marcus flinched at her name. He yanked me sideways, dragging me into a small alcove behind a display of architectural models, away from the prying eyes of the press. Listen to me, you ungrateful little leech, he snarled. The mask was completely off now. His face was twisted with a mixture of rage and panic. I do not know where you got the money for that dress, probably stole it or found a sugar daddy, but you are not welcome here. Is that so? I asked. I thought this was a celebration of family legacy. This is a celebration of my work, Marcus spat. Mine and Julian's. You have no part in this. You are a stain, Nancy. A reminder of everything mediocre that I tried to breed out of this line. He leaned in, his face inches from mine. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. What do you want? Is that it? You want a payoff? You want me to write you a check so you can go back to your basement and play with your old papers? He reached into his tuxedo pocket, pulling out a checkbook. How much 5,010? Name a price to get out of my sight. I looked at the checkbook. It was pathetic. He really thought money was the only currency that mattered. He thought he could buy silence because he had bought everything else in his life. I do not want your money, Dad, I said softly. Then what? He demanded. Love apologies. Grow up, Nancy. The world does not care about your feelings. It cares about winners, and you are looking at a winner. He gestured to the room, to the soaring glass walls, to the crowd of admirers. I built this, he said, his voice trembling with ego. I created this from nothing. Me. And in 10 minutes, I am going to go up on that stage and the whole world is going to applaud me. And you are going to be escorted out by the police for trespassing. I am not trespassing, I said. And I am not here to make a scene. I just told you. I am here to watch you honor Grandma." Marcus laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. "Honor her, I am doing her a favor. I am putting her name on a building she couldn't have designed in her wildest dreams. She was a delirious old woman. Nancy. She died confused and ashamed. Just like you will." He released my arm with a shove. "Get out," he commanded. "If I see your face when the lights go up, I will have you arrested, and I will make sure you lose that little job of yours at the archive. I will crush you. Nancy, do not think I won't." He straightened his tie, smoothed his jacket, and composed his face back into the mask of the benevolent genius. He turned and walked away, back into the light, back to the applause that was already starting to ripple through the room. I stood in the shadows of the alcove, rubbing my arm where he had grabbed me. It would bruise. Good. I wanted the bruise. It was a reminder of why I was doing this. He had called me a nothing. He had said I had no power. He believed it. He was so blinded by his own reflection that he couldn't see the cliff he was walking toward. He thought the danger was me making a scene, screaming or crying. He didn't understand that the most dangerous thing in the room wasn't the girl he had bullied for 20 years. It was the truth. I stepped out of the alcove. The lights in the main hall were dimming. A hush fell over the crowd as the dramatic music swelled. The spotlight hit the podium. I did not leave. I did not run. I turned and walked calmly toward the back of the room, toward the scaffolding where the audio-visual booth sat in the darkness. I looked up at Leo. He was watching me. I raised my hand and gave him a single, sharp signal. Marcus was walking up the stairs to the stage. He waved to the crowd. He looked invincible. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in days. "Go ahead, Dad," I thought. As I leaned against the control booth, hidden by the darkness, "Take your bow. It will be your last." The house lights died. It was not a gradual dimming, but a sudden, theatrical plunge into darkness that drew a collective gasp from the 500 guests gathered in the atrium. For a heartbeat, the room was pitch black, a void of expensive perfume and silent anticipation. Then, a single spotlight sliced through the gloom. It was a beam of pure, brilliant white, cutting a cone through the air to land precisely on center stage. There stood Marcus Willoughby. He had positioned himself perfectly. He was not behind the podium, using it as a shield. No, he stood in front of it, vulnerable and open, his arms slightly spread as if to embrace the entire room. The light caught the silver in his hair, turning it into a halo. It reflected off the diamond cufflinks I knew he had bought to celebrate his first $1 million, earned from a museum design my grandmother had sketched on a Sunday afternoon while he was golfing. He waited. He knew exactly how long to let the silence hang. He let it stretch until it was uncomfortable, until every eye was fixed on him, until the audience was practically begging him to speak. "Legacy," Marcus said. His voice was amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, booming yet intimate, filling the cavernous space with a rich baritone that sounded like melted chocolate. "It is a heavy word," he continued, beginning a slow, measured walk across the stage. "It is a burden. It is a fire that burns you even as it lights the way for others. When I look up at this glass ceiling, at these steel arches that defy gravity, I do not just see a building, I see a timeline. I see the past, the present, and the future colliding in a single moment of perfect geometry." The crowd was mesmerized. I stood in the shadows by the audio booth, my hand gripping the cold metal of the wireless microphone I had swiped from the tech table when Leo wasn't looking. I watched my father perform, and it was a performance. It was the greatest role of his life. He wasn't an architect. He was an actor playing the part of a visionary. "Many of you know the story of this tower," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a somber, reverent whisper. "You know it as the Rose Tower. You know I named it after my late mother, Rose Willoughby." He paused. He looked down at his shoes, then up at the ceiling, blinking rapidly. I saw him reach into his pocket and pull out a handkerchief. He dabbed at the corner of his dry eye. "Oh, give me a break," I muttered under my breath. "My mother," Marcus said, his voice trembling with manufactured emotion, "was a woman of immense heart. She was not a creator. She did not have the mind for structure, for engineering, for the brutal mathematics of design. She was a simple woman who loved flowers and knitting, but she understood the burden I carried. She sat by my side for 30 years, watching me work, bringing me coffee while I slaved over blueprints until the sun came up. She did not understand the lines I was drawing, but she understood the passion that drove the hand." A ripple of sympathetic murmurs went through the crowd. "Aw, what a devoted son." They were thinking, how noble of him to honor a simple woman. My grip on the microphone tightened until my knuckles turned white. He wasn't just stealing her work. He was rewriting her existence. He was turning Rose Willoughby, a brilliant structural pioneer who could calculate load-bearing limits in her head, into a coffee-fetching cheerleader. He was stripping her of her intellect to make his own seem larger. "She died 3 years ago," Marcus said, looking out at the audience with a brave, tragic smile. "And her final wish was that I finish this project. She said to me, 'Marcus, build something that touches the sky, so I can see it from heaven.' She died believing in me, even when the critics doubted, even when the financing fell through, even when the world said it was impossible." He spread his arms wide again. "Well, Mother, look down. We did it." Thunderous applause erupted. It started in the front row, where the mayor sat, and swept back like a wave. Men in tuxedos nodded solemnly. Women wiped tears from their eyes. They were eating it up. They were gorging themselves on the lie because it was a beautiful lie. It was a story of filial piety and triumph against the odds. It was perfect, and it was sickening. I looked up at the lighting booth. I couldn't see Leo, but I knew he was there, his finger hovering over a button, his heart probably racing as fast as mine. Not yet. We had to let him climb higher. The higher he climbed, the harder the fall. Marcus waited for the applause to die down. He held up a hand, a benevolent king silencing his subjects. "But a legacy is not just about looking back," he said, his voice shifting, becoming stronger, more energetic. "It is about looking forward. It is about the bloodline. It is about the Willoughby gift." He turned toward the wings of the stage. "Please welcome the future of Willoughby Designs, my son, my partner, the co-creator of the interior concepts you see around you today, Julian Willoughby." The spotlight swung to the left. Julian walked out. He had composed himself since our encounter in the lobby. He walked with a strut that was a poor imitation of his father's confident stride. He waved to the crowd, flashing a bright white smile. He looked every inch the golden boy, the prodigy. Marcus wrapped an arm around Julian's shoulders, pulling him into the center of the light. It was a tableau of dynastic power, the king and the prince. "Julian is only 18, Marcus announced, beaming with paternal pride. "But he has the same spark I had at his age, the same spark that my mother, bless her soul, lacked." He gestured to a stand covered by a velvet cloth on the side of the stage. "I want to show you something," Marcus said. "Tonight, we are not just opening a building, we are passing a torch." He walked over to the stand and whipped the cloth away. Beneath it was a framed drawing. It was a rough, charcoal sketch of the tower. It looked impressive, bold strokes, dramatic shading. "This," Marcus said, pointing to the frame, "is the very first concept sketch for the Rose Tower, but I did not draw it. Julian drew this when he was 15 years old. We sat at the kitchen table, and he said, 'Dad, what if the building looked like a flower opening up?' And in 5 minutes, he produced this." The crowd gasped in admiration. "A prodigy," someone whispered loudly enough to be heard. I stared at the drawing on the stage. It was a fake. I knew it was a fake, because the real first concept sketch, the one Grandma Rose had drawn 10 years ago, was currently sitting in a digital file on Leo's computer. Julian hadn't drawn that sketch at 15. He had probably hired a freelance artist to do it last week, Or Marcus had drawn it himself to bolster the genius heir narrative. "This building," Marcus bellowed, his voice reaching a crescendo, "is the physical manifestation of the Willoughby DNA. It is proof that talent is not learned, it is bred. It stands as a testament to my vision and to the raw, natural genius of my son. We built this not with luck, but with superior intellect." He grabbed Julian's hand and raised it in the air. "The Rose Tower is ours. It is the Willoughby mark on history." The applause began to swell again, a roar of approval for the two men who claimed to own the sky. Marcus looked like a god. He was basking in it, his head thrown back, his eyes closed, drinking in the adoration. "Now," I whispered. I didn't say it into the microphone. I said it to the darkness. But up in the booth, Leo was watching. He saw the signal my left hand raised. Fingers splayed. He hit the enter key. The giant LED screen behind Marcus, which had been displaying a rotating gold 3D logo of Willoughby Designs, suddenly glitched. It wasn't a subtle fade. It was a hard cut. The screen went black. The sudden loss of the background light startled the audience. The applause faltered. Heads turned. People murmured. Was it a power outage? A technical failure. Marcus opened his eyes. He sensed the shift in the room's energy. He turned around to look at the screen. "What is going on?" he hissed. His voice caught by the lapel mic he had forgotten was on. "Fix the screen." Then, an image appeared. It was not a logo. It was not a polished architectural rendering. It was a piece of yellowed, lined notebook paper. It was blown up to be 30 feet tall. Every tear in the paper, every coffee stain, every imperfection was visible in high definition, and the handwriting, it was shaky, spiked, and unmistakably aggressive. It was the handwriting of a woman writing in secret, writing with urgency. The text on the screen was short. It was a dedication page from a sketchbook. To Nancy, the only one who understands the soul of these drawings, the only one who listens when the walls speak. Keep these safe, my darling. They are the truth I cannot speak while I'm alive. Grandma rose. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. 500 people read the words simultaneously. They read the name Nancy. They read the implication that there were drawings to be kept safe. Marcus froze. He stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. For a second, he looked like a statue. He couldn't process what he was seeing. It was impossible. Nancy was the failure. Nancy was the one in the basement. Nancy didn't have anything. Then, the image changed. It was a slow dissolve this time. The note faded, and in its place, a split screen appeared. On the left side, under the heading, Marcus Willoughby, Official Design, 2024, was the sleek, digitized rendering of the Rose Tower lobby we were currently standing in. On the right side, under the heading, Rose Willoughby, Sketchbook Volume 42, dated 2014, was a hand-drawn elevation. The crowd gasped. It was not a polite gasp this time. It was the sound of shock. The drawings were identical. The curve of the staircase, the placement of the fountain, the geometric pattern of the ceiling panels. Every single detail that Marcus had claimed as his divine inspiration was there, drawn in charcoal, dated a full decade before Marcus broke ground, and then the sound began. It started as a low murmur, like the buzzing of bees. Then it grew. People were turning to each other. "Did you see the date?" 2014. But Marcus said he designed it last year. "Who is Nancy? Is that his mother's handwriting? I thought he said she couldn't draw." Julian took a step back, away from his father. He looked at the screen, then at the crowd. He looked like a trapped animal. He dropped the hand that Marcus had been holding triumphantly just moments before. Marcus spun around to face the technical booth. He was red in the face, his veins bulging. "Turn it off!" he screamed. His voice cracked, losing all its chocolate smoothness. It was the shrill, desperate voice of a man losing control. "Cut the feed. We are being hacked. Security. Cut the power." But Leo didn't cut the power. He played the next slide, the Helix Bridge, left Marcus accepting the National Design Award in front of the bridge in 2019. Right, Rose's detailed structural analysis of the spiral support system. Dated 2015. Note in margin, Marcus says this is impossible. I will have to show him the math. The murmurs turned into open conversation. Laughter nervous. Shocked laughter bubbled up from the back of the room. The illusion was breaking. The golden halo around Marcus was dissolving, revealing the sweating, panic-stricken man underneath. "This is slander!" Marcus roared into his lapel mic. "This is a fabrication. I will sue whoever is doing this." He looked frantic. He looked at Elena in the front row. She was pale, clutching her pearl necklace, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She stood up, waving her hands at the stage, signaling him to do something, anything, but there was nothing he could do. The screen was 50 feet wide. The truth was 50 feet tall. I stepped out of the shadows. I was standing near the main speaker stack, about 20 feet from the stage. The spotlight was still on Marcus, but the light from the giant screen illuminated the whole room in a ghostly blue glow. I lifted the microphone to my lips. "It is not a fabrication, Dad," I said. My voice rang out through the atrium. Clear, calm, and terrifyingly steady. It cut through the murmurs. It cut through Marcus's shouting. It echoed off the glass walls that my grandmother had designed. Marcus whipped his head around. He squinted into the gloom. "Who said that?" he demanded. "Show yourself." "You really should have checked the box before you gave it to me," I said, stepping forward into the fringe of the spotlight. The blue velvet of my dress caught the light, shimmering like deep water. "You were so eager to throw away her memory that you didn't realize you were handing me the gun." The crowd parted. They turned to look at me. The woman in the midnight blue dress. The woman no one had recognized. The woman who had been a ghost in her own family for 28 years. I walked toward the stage. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a restoration expert approaching a damaged canvas. I had come to strip away the varnish. "Who are you?" someone in the crowd whispered. I didn't answer them. I kept my eyes locked on Marcus. "You said she died ashamed of me," I said, my voice amplified, filling every corner of the room. "You said she was simple. You said she had no talent." I stopped at the foot of the stairs leading up to the stage. I looked up at him. He looked down at me, his eyes wide with horror. He recognized me now. He saw the dress. He saw the makeup. But mostly, he saw the resemblance. I had his chin, but I had her eyes. "Turn off her mic," Marcus screamed at the sound booth. "Security, get her out of here. She is crazy. She is a stalker." But the mic didn't cut out. Leo had locked the channel. "She wasn't ashamed, Dad," I said, taking the first step up the stairs. "She was preparing." On the screen behind him, a new image flashed. It was a video. It was grainy, taken from an old handheld camera, but the audio was crisp. It was Grandma Rose, sitting in her armchair, holding a cup of tea. She looked frail, but her eyes were sharp. The date stamp on the video was 3 days before she died. "Marcus thinks he is a builder," the video Rose said, her voice raspy but amused. "But he is just a landlord. He rents my ideas. He lives in my head. And one day, Nancy is going to evict him." The crowd went dead silent. I reached the top of the stairs. I stood 10 feet away from him. Julian scrambled back, hiding behind the podium. Marcus stood alone, trembling, stripped naked in front of the city he thought he owned. "The play is over, Marcus," I said. "Take a bow." "You were right about one thing." "Dad," I said, my voice booming through the atrium, echoing off the glass walls that he claimed were his own. "This building is a testament to intellect. It is a masterpiece of engineering, but it is not yours." Marcus looked as if he had been shot. The color drained from his face so completely that his skin looked like old parchment. He gripped the sides of the podium, his knuckles white, his chest heaving. For a moment, he couldn't speak. The shock of seeing me, The daughter he had dismissed as a piece of refuse, standing there in a gown that cost more than my car, had short-circuited his brain. Then, the rage took over. "Cut the mic!" he screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek that tore through the sophisticated sound system. He pointed a trembling finger at the lighting booth. "Leo, I am paying you. Cut the damn sound right now. Security, get up here. Shoot her if you have to." But the sound did not cut. The speakers hummed with life, waiting for my next word. Up in the booth, Leo had done exactly what I asked. He had locked the system. The only person who could silence me now was me. "Security cannot help you, Marcus," I said, taking another step up the stairs. The click of my heels on the metal tread was amplified, sounding like the ticking of a clock counting down his remaining seconds. "Because the truth does not need a security clearance." I raised my hand toward the screen. "Leo," I commanded. The image on the giant LED screen flickered. The grainy video of Grandma Rose vanished. In its place, a new graphic appeared. It was stark, brutal, and undeniable. It was a split screen, divided right down the middle by a thick red line. On the left side was the official blueprint for the Rose Tower, the one Marcus had submitted to the City Planning Committee in 2024. It showed the complex, load-bearing arches of the lobby, the specific way the steel truss met the glass curtain wall. On the right side was a scan of a yellowed piece of vellum. It was wrinkled. It had a coffee ring stain on the corner, but the drawing was identical. The lines were the same. The calculations in the margins were the same, but there was one difference. At the bottom of the right-hand image, stamped in red ink, was a notary seal, and inside that seal was a date, October 14th, 2014. "Look at the date, Dad," I said, pointing to the screen. "Look at it. 2014, 10 years before you had your divine inspiration on that flight to Paris. 10 years before you told the world that this tower was your gift to the city." The crowd erupted. It wasn't just murmurs anymore. It was a roar. People were standing up, craning their necks. Phones were out, hundreds of them, recording the screen, recording me, recording the collapse of a titan. "That is a forgery," Marcus yelled, abandoning the podium and rushing to the front of the stage. He looked wild, his hair disheveled, his eyes bulging. "She photoshopped it. My daughter is a graphic designer. She faked it. It is a lie." "Is the notary stamp a lie?" I asked, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with his hysteria. "Because that stamp belongs to Arthur Pendleton, a sworn officer of the court, and unlike you, he does not erase history." I reached the center of the stage. I was standing 5 feet from him now. The spotlight hit us both, blindingly bright. I could see the sweat dripping down his temple. I could smell the fear radiating off him. It smelled sour, like spoiled milk. "You told me she died ashamed of me," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You came to my apartment. You threw that box at me. And you told me that the woman who raised me couldn't stand the sight of me. You tried to break me with her memory." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the red legal accordion folder I had taken from the safe. I held it up high, letting the light catch the gold embossing on the cover. "She wasn't ashamed of me, Marcus. She was protecting me. And she wasn't disappointed in me. She died in despair because her only son, the man she loved and supported for 50 years, had turned into a thief." "Shut up," Marcus lunged at me. "Give me that." He was fast, fueled by adrenaline, but I was expecting it. I stepped back, and he stumbled, nearly falling off the edge of the stage. A collective gasp went through the room, the great Marcus Willoughby, brawling with his daughter on live television. "She knew," I continued, my voice hard as diamond. "She knew you would steal it. She knew you couldn't help yourself. You are a parasite. Dad, you haven't had an original idea since 1995. You took her genius. You put your name on it. And when she tried to stop you, you drugged her. Liar." A screech came from the front row. Elena, my stepmother, was scrambling up the stairs on the side of the stage. Her face was a mask of fury. She had lost her composure entirely. Her expensive dress was bunched up in her hands so she could run. She looked like a desperate animal defending its territory. "You ungrateful little brat!" Elena screamed, rushing toward me with her hands clawed, aiming for the microphone, for the folder, for my face. "He gave you everything. He paid for your school. He put a roof over your head. How dare you ruin this night?" She was 3 feet away from me when a figure stepped out from the shadows of the wings. He moved with a speed that belied his 70 years. He stepped directly into Elena's path, planting his feet firmly, a human barricade in a tweed suit. "That is enough, Mrs. Willoughby," Arthur Pendleton boomed. Elena crashed into him. She recoiled. Stunned, she looked up at the old man she had helped destroy. The man she thought was senile and forgotten. "You," she hissed. "You are supposed to be in a home." Arthur adjusted his glasses. He pulled a folded document from his inside pocket and snapped it open. "I am Arthur Pendleton," he announced, his voice projecting without a microphone, trained by 40 years in courtrooms. "I am the legal representative for the estate of Rose Willoughby, and I am currently acting as the trustee for the intellectual property you are standing on." He turned to the crowd. "This woman," he pointed at Elena, "and her husband," he pointed at Marcus, "are currently under investigation for elder abuse, fraud, and the theft of intellectual property valued at over $300 million. The flashbulbs were going off so fast, it looked like a strobe light. The reporters in the back were shouting questions. "Mr. Pendleton, is that true? Marcus, do you have a comment?" Marcus stood frozen. He looked at Arthur, then at me, then at the screen. The walls were closing in. "This is a setup," Marcus stammered, addressing the room, his hands shaking. "My mother was confused. She didn't know what she was drawing. I guided her hand. It was a collaboration, yes. A collaboration. I was the vision. She was just the draftsman." "Is that so?" I asked. I reached into my clutch again. "You said she was confused. You said she was happy to let you take the credit." I pulled out a small, black digital voice recorder. It looked ancient compared to the sleek tech in the room. It was the recorder I had found tucked inside the lining of the box, wrapped in a receipt from a pharmacy. "This was recorded 2 days before she died," I said. "When you thought she was asleep, when you thought the morphine had knocked her out." I held the recorder up to the microphone. "No," Marcus screamed. "Don't." I pressed play. The sound of static filled the atrium. Then, a voice. It was weak, breathy, but unmistakable. It was Grandma Rose. "Marcus, please." Then, Marcus's voice, sharp, impatient. "Just sign the damn papers. Mother, stop being dramatic. You are not going to use these copyrights. You are dying. Do you want the business to fail? Do you want Julian to have nothing?" "It is not yours." "Marcus," Rose's voice whispered, "the sanctuary is for the city. It needs the gardens. You are stripping it bare." "I am making it profitable," Marcus shouted on the recording, the sound of paper rustling. "Sign it. Or I swear to God, I will tell the nurses to stop the pain meds. Is that what you want? Do you want to scream for the next 48 hours? A gasp of pure horror swept through the room. It was a physical reaction. People recoiled. The socialites, the investors, the politicians. They looked at Marcus as if he had turned into a monster right before their eyes. "I will sign," Rose whispered, her voice breaking. "But you will never own it. You can steal the paper, Marcus, but you cannot steal the soul. One day the truth will rot you from the inside out." The recording ended with a click. I lowered the microphone. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of a grave. Marcus was shaking. He wasn't just trembling, he was vibrating. He looked at his hands, the hands that Rose had accused of torture. He looked out at the audience. No one was clapping, no one was smiling. The mayor, sitting in the front row, stood up. He buttoned his jacket, looked at Marcus with a mixture of disgust and pity, and turned his back. He walked out. That was the signal. The investors began to stand. The members of the architecture board, the critics, they turned their backs on the stage. They didn't boo. They didn't shout. They simply withdrew their approval. They withdrew their presence. Marcus ran to the edge of the stage. "Wait," he pleaded. "It is out of context. She was in pain. I was trying to help her. Nancy tampered with the tape. She is jealous. Look at her." He pointed at me, his finger shaking violently. "She has always been jealous of Julian. She is a failure. She works in a basement cleaning trash. She is trying to ruin me because I didn't give her a trust fund. She's crazy. Can't you see she is crazy?" He looked at Julian. "Julian, tell them how we worked on the design." Julian was cowering behind the podium. He looked at the crowd, then at the screen where the evidence of his mediocrity was plastered 10 feet high. He looked at his father, the man who had promised him the world, but had only given him a stolen crown. Julian shook his head. He backed away. "I didn't know," Julian whispered, his voice picked up by the podium mic. "I didn't know you forced her." "Julian," Marcus roared. "I'm leaving," Julian said. He jumped off the side of the stage and ran toward the exit. Pushing through the crowd of reporters, Marcus was alone. Elena was being held back by Arthur, sobbing hysterically about her reputation. I walked over to Marcus. I was close enough to touch him, but I didn't. I didn't want to contaminate myself. "You called me a scavenger," I said quietly. "Just for him." "You were right. I am. I scavenged the truth you tried to bury." I held up the red folder one last time. "And now," I said, turning to the cameras that were zooming in on his disintegration, "I am here to take back what belongs to the Willoughby name." I signaled to Leo one last time. The screen changed. The blueprints vanished. In their place, a single document appeared. It was the title deed to the land and the intellectual property rights for the building formerly known as the Rose Tower. The name on the deed was highlighted in bright yellow. Owner Nancy Willoughby. "This isn't your building, Dad," I said into the mic. "You are trespassing." Marcus looked at the deed on the screen, his eyes darting back and forth across the legal text, as if he were trying to find a loophole in the pixels themselves. He was panting, his chest heaving beneath his tuxedo shirt, sweat streaming down his face and ruining the expensive makeup he had applied for the cameras. The silence in the room was no longer shocked. It was expectant. The audience was waiting for the kill. "No," Marcus rasped. He gripped the podium so hard I thought the wood might splinter. "No, this is a trick. That is paper. Paper means nothing. I poured the concrete, I hired the contractors, I signed the checks." He looked out at the dark cavern of the room, desperate to find an ally, but finding only judgment. He turned back to me, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "You think a piece of paper matters?" he screamed, his voice shredding the last remnants of his dignity. "I built this, I stood in the rain and watched the steel go up, I negotiated the zoning permits. This is my blood in these walls. This building bears my name. It is the Rose Tower. Built by Marcus Willoughby. You cannot take that away from me with a scanner and a lawyer." He was hysterical now, pacing the stage like a caged tiger. "The land is mine," he bellowed, stamping his foot on the stage floor. "This dirt is mine. You can claim the drawings, you little witch, but the ground we're standing on belongs to Willoughby Designs, and I am Willoughby Designs, so get off my stage. Get off my property before I drag you off myself." He took a step toward me, his hands curled into fists. He looked ready to strike me, ready to physically assault his own daughter in front of the city's elite just to preserve his delusion. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked him straight in the eyes, and I saw the hollowness there. I saw a man who had spent his entire life building facades because he had no foundation. "You are wrong, Dad," I said. My voice was low, but the microphone carried it to every corner of the room with crystal clarity. "You are wrong about the drawings, you are wrong about Grandma, and you are definitely wrong about the land." I raised my hand toward the booth one last time. "Arthur," I said, "show him page 42. The screen behind us shifted. The deed zoomed in. It focused on a specific paragraph at the bottom of the document, a clause that had been buried in the dense legal language of the trust transfer. 5 years ago, I said, addressing the audience as much as my father, when Grandma Rose set up the Rose Willoughby Trust, she didn't just transfer the intellectual property, she transferred the title to the plot of land at 400 Pine Street. She owned this lot. Dad, she bought it in 1985, long before you even started your firm. Marcus froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. She transferred the land into the trust, I continued, reciting the facts with the cold precision of a judge reading a verdict. And she added a specific stipulation, a stipulation that stated that any structure built upon this land would automatically become the property of the trust upon its completion. I pointed to the highlighted text on the screen. Clause 7B, improvements and fixtures. Any and all permanent structures erected on the parcel shall be deemed the property of the beneficiary. You were so busy trying to steal the credit, I said, walking closer to him, that you never bothered to check the title search. You assumed she left the land to you in her will. You assumed you owned it because you are a man and she was just your mother. But you didn't own it. Marcus, you were building on borrowed ground. I stopped 2 feet from him. He looked small now. The Titan was gone. You spent $300 million of your investors' money to build a tower, I said. You poured the concrete. You laid the steel. You are right about that. You did all the work. And you did it all for me. The realization hit him. I saw it happen. I saw the light go out behind his eyes. His knees buckled slightly. You, he whispered, you stole my company. I didn't steal anything, I replied. I inherited it. This land belongs to me. This building belongs to me. The drawings belong to me. I turned to the crowd. I looked at the investors who were standing in stunned silence. I looked at the reporters who were frantically typing on their phones. My name is Nancy Willoughby, I announced, and as the sole owner of this property and the intellectual rights to the sanctuary, I have an announcement to make regarding the management of this project. I looked back at Marcus. He was trembling, tears of rage and impotence streaming down his face. Marcus Willoughby, I said, my voice hard as steel. You are fired, the words hung in the air. And furthermore, I continued, I am issuing a permanent ban. You are trespassing on private property. You have 5 minutes to remove yourself from my building before I have you physically removed. Marcus let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He looked around for Elena, for Julian, for anyone to save him. But Elena was cowering in the shadows of the wings, and Julian was gone. You can't do this, Marcus wailed. I am your father. No, I said. You are just a bad architect. From the side of the stage, movement caught my eye. Arthur Pendleton walked out, but he was not alone. Behind him were 4 officers in dark uniforms. They weren't regular beat cops. They were from the Economic Crimes Unit. Arthur nodded to me. It was done. The lead detective stepped onto the stage. He approached Marcus, who was now leaning against the podium for support, looking like a man having a cardiac event. Marcus Willoughby, the detective asked. Marcus looked up, dazed. Who are you? I am Detective Miller with the Seattle Police Department, the officer said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal glinted under the stage lights. We have a warrant for your arrest. Arrest? Marcus squeaked. For what? Grand larceny, fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. The detective listed off. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. The crowd watched in breathless silence as the great architect was handcuffed. The click of the cuffs was audible over the speakers. It was the sound of a legacy shattering. Marcus began to sob. It was an ugly, guttural sound. I built this, he kept repeating, over and over, as the officers took hold of his arms. I built this. They marched him across the stage. He looked back at me one last time. His eyes were pleading, begging me to stop it, begging me to be the submissive daughter I had been for 28 years. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I watched him being dragged toward the exit, his expensive tuxedo rumpled, his dignity gone. I looked down at the front row. Elena was trying to sneak away, using her purse to shield her face from the cameras. But the photographers were swarming her. She was an accomplice, and her trial in the court of public opinion had already begun. I stood alone on the stage. The spotlight was hot on my skin. The adrenaline that had fueled me for 3 days was starting to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But beneath the tiredness, there was peace. I looked up at the giant screen. The legal documents were gone. In their place, Leo had put up one final image. It was a photo of Grandma Rose, young and smiling, standing in front of a drafting table, holding a pencil. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the magnetic key fob. The key to the storage unit, the key to the truth. I gripped it tight in my palm. The metal bit into my skin, grounding me. I did not smile for the cameras. I did not wave to the crowd. I did not give a speech about how I was going to run the company. There would be time for that later. There would be time for lawyers, for restructuring, for renaming the building back to the sanctuary. Right now, there was only the end. I turned my back on the audience. I turned my back on the empty podium where my father had stood and lied. I turned my back on the family that had tried to erase me. I looked at Grandma's photo on the screen one last time. "We did it," I whispered. I walked off the stage, my heels clicking on the floor, walking away from the wreckage and into the rest of my life. Behind me, the flashbulbs exploded like fireworks, capturing the moment the ghost girl finally became the owner of her own story. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a wild ride, and I really hope you enjoyed the journey of justice and revenge. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from New York, London, Tokyo, or somewhere else entirely? Please drop a comment below and let me know. And tell me what you would have done if you were in Nancy's shoes. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Sunday Drama Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button so we can share this story with even more people. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next video.